For more on the climate crisis in Europe, we're joined by Laurie Laybourn, an Executive Director on the Strategic Climate Risks Initiative, live from London. Sir, thank you so much and welcome to Asia One News. Europe is experiencing one of its worst wildfire seasons in recent years. To what extent is climate change driving the increasing frequency and the intensity of these fires?
So climate change supercharges this situation. There are lots of things that make places like Europe vulnerable to wildfires. That includes how cities are built, how the urban environment interacts with forests. The list goes on. Climate change then comes in and supercharges the risk. In this case, by making things warm and dry, and in some places windier. When all of those things come together, then you get the potential for wildfires of this scale. So climate change doesn't cause anything, but it increases the risks and then supercharges things when they do come. So a good example of that right now in France is that we're getting successive heat waves that are happening on top of these wildfires, and climate change is loading the dice, as it were, for weather that will be hotter and more combustible, and that's the role that it plays.
And so France and Spain have evacuated hundreds of thousands of people. Why are authorities finding these wildfires just so difficult to contain, despite deploying massive firefighting resources?
Partly just the sheer scale and speed at which these are moving. The wildfires in France have reached such a scale that they're effectively creating their own weather, because they create these vast clouds that then further feed the fires. But there's another reason, which is that many of Europe, including France, have not done enough to plan for these types of eventualities. For decades now, the planning to prepare for a climate change world and the threats that it brings has been far behind what is required. Governments across Europe have been told by their expert advisors that they are a long way behind on adapting to the current climate, let alone the one that will emerge in the coming years and decades. So alongside the sheer scale of this, one of the biggest problems has been the failure to plan for these types of eventualities.
And Laurie, beyond the immediate destruction, what long-term environmental, economic and public health impacts could these wildfires have across Europe?
So whenever there have been wildfires of this scale around the world, and including in Europe, there has been an enduring effect on people's health. That's lung health, the health impacts of them being moved, of their jobs being affected. We could expect quite significant economic costs that would endure over time as businesses are closed temporarily or permanently because things have been destroyed, and so on and so forth. There's then, I think, something deeper, which is a political consequence. Hopefully that consequence will be that this acts as a wake-up call for people to realize that we are in a new climate reality in which events like this are not just surprising one-offs, but now potentially going to be year-by-year occurrences, not every year, but the events of this severity are now going to become far more frequent. And hopefully that will lead to a situation where politicians then more forcefully act on planning for the worst, for adapting to that, as well as trying to avoid much worse things down the line. It is critical that these wildfires act as that tragic wake-up call for people to realize that we really are now in a slow-moving emergency situation.
And Laurie, looking ahead, what urgent measures should European governments take to prepare for increasingly frequent and severe wildfire seasons linked to climate change?
So they've got to begin to understand that these things are now possible, that they're not possible just in 2050 or in the future, that they're now impacting today. There's lots of things that can be done to reduce wildfire risk, particularly in rural areas, reducing how certain buildings encroach upon nature. So there's better regulations about that to make sure that there isn't that risk created as human populations increasingly encroach upon, say, forest ecosystems and so on and so forth. But I think in general, beyond even wildfires, when we look at all the climate impacts that are now coming to Europe and other parts of the world, we've got to focus on basically doing two things at the same time. protecting people through ensuring that wildfires aren't as large scale and protecting them against, say, heat extremes, while at the same time reducing carbon emissions. In the future, we could end up with the risk where a rush towards protecting ourselves against the consequences of climate change world could mean we forget about the reducing emissions part. That would be a massive, a catastrophic mistake because it means we wouldn't get on climate change over the long term and then we would reach limits to our adaptation. So maybe the most important thing that should come out of this experience is the need to protect people today through becoming better adapted with the same types of technologies and approaches that reduce emissions and therefore protect people in the longer term by reducing the drivers of climate change.
Laurie, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.